used to be a journalist, and 20 years ago, I was traveling through the hills of Nepal when I came across rows of villages with missing girls. And I was really surprised, and I asked the villagers where the girls were, and they told me they all are in Bombay. Now, that was really puzzling to me because these villages were 2 hours off the highway, 1400 kilometers from Bombay. So, as a good journalist, I began to look for the answer, and the answer changed my life. Because what I found was that a smooth supply chain existed from these remote villages in the hills of the Himalayas all the way to the brothels of Bombay. There was a local village procurer who could be an uncle neighbor who would offer a poor and starving farmer $100, $150 for a young virgin girl, take her to the border of India and Nepal. There were the corrupt border guards, wink, wink, nod, nod. The girls were taken across the border. On the other side of the border were the lodge keepers who would lock up these girls, starve them, beat them, till their spirits were completely subjugated, then hand them over to a set of transporters who would put them on buses and trains and take them to the brothels of Bombay, Delhi and Calcutta. There were the pimps who would negotiate the price of the girls depending on their beauty and age. The younger, the better, the more voluptuous, fair skin was at a premium. Then they would hand over these girls to the brothel managers who would lock up these little girls for the next 5 years. And they would be trotted out for 8 or 10 customers every night for what I call commercial rape. And behind all of this were the customers who would pay 100 rupees, 200 rupees to buy a girl. And her life was completely used. And behind the customers were the organized criminal networks who were driving this industry for profit. So they were conditioning young men to, wanting to become sex buyers, and they were conditioning brothel managers to say there's a profit in it, and preying on poor girls all over our country and in Nepal and Bangladesh. And as a journalist, I'd covered war, I'd covered famine, I'd covered hunger, I'd covered caste conflict, all of that, ethnic conflict. But I'd never seen this kind of deliberate exploitation of one human being by another. So I wanted to do something about it. The first response was to tell the story. So I ended up making a documentary called The Selling of Innocence. It took me 18 months to make the documentary. Knives were pulled out on me, permissions were cancelled to go into villages, etc. But I somehow made it thanks to the help of women in the brothels of Bombay. And that was a life-changing experience for me because I won an Emmy, but it seemed irrelevant. I was at the Broadway Marquis Hotel in New York, and I felt that, I want to do more. So I gave up journalism, and I did two things, exactly 20 years ago. And I did two things at that time. I started this NGO with the women in prostitution who had told their stories in my film and called it Apne Aap, which means self-action in Hindi. And I also joined the UN to see what I could do on global policy affecting women and girls in prostitution. I set up Apne Aap with these 22 women, and Apne Aap is now 15 years old, and we've helped more than 20,000 girls and women in prostitution in Calcutta, in Bihar, in Delhi, in Rajasthan, pan-India, and also in America. With the UN, I've worked on creating a UN protocol to end trafficking of women and girls. I've worked with the French government. They've just awarded me with a huge honor for helping them change the law. Swedish, Norwegian governments. I've worked on laws and policies globally and in India for our own Section 370 of the Indian Penal Code, as well as grassroots girl by girl. And one of the things which happened while I was doing this work was that I heard the stories of the women. They were talking about betrayal, they were talking about extreme poverty, they were talking about how they had to depend on alcohol and drugs to block out the experience of men lying on top of them. They were talking about the fact that they would have out-of-body experiences, like somebody was on them but they would pretend that their soul was somewhere else and the body was there. So I was listening to all these stories of torture, violence, dehumanizing. And I kept trying to talk to people about it, but people would say that can't be true, it's a choice, women want to be in prostitution. So I said, no, actually prostitution, so actually what I wanted to say was that prostitution is an absence of choice. But somehow I was not able to convey the reality. And so then I thought maybe fiction is a better way to get under people's skin. And therefore I looked at modern Indian writers who have written extensively and beautifully with great empathy for what I call the last girl, this 13-year-old in a brothel or the 20-year-old woman in a brothel. And so I said, maybe that's the way I can communicate with society, that, you know, who will understand that what a woman really feels and wants and what happens to her. So therefore, then I brought out this book called River of Flesh, The Prostituted Woman in Indian Short Fiction. And I took 14 stories, 22 stories from 14 Indian languages, and got them translated to convey the courage, the resistance, the pain, the torture, and the journey of a woman in prostitution. And the stories are written by men and women. They are written by people in Bengali, Urdu, Hindi, Kannada, all of that. And each of them, Manto, Ismat Chugtai, Kamleshwar, Amrita Preetham, and so all of them have this sense of empathy, which came out of a progressive thought process, where you actually try to bridge being someone of privilege with someone who was underprivileged, which came out of India's freedom struggle, where Gandhiji actually said that, whenever we do anything, we must think of the last person we know, the weakest person we know. And all these people, Manto, Ismat Chugtai, Kamleshwar, all of them are informed by trying to get into the shoes of the last through their thinking. So for example, the story River of Flesh, the prostitute is a woman, yet Kamleshwar gets into her shoes and he writes, she feels, she writes that she cannot stand the smell of her customer's smelly socks. Now that's an occupational hazard that it takes extreme sensitivity to understand. Or Manto writes that how this woman wants, in the 100 power bulb, that how this woman wants to sleep. But the pimp keeps getting a customer after customer, and then finally she smashes the head of the pimp and she's snoring peacefully. So for someone to understand a man, and that to a woman's desire to sleep, who's a prostitute, because very few people will understand that women in prostitution have to be available night and day. They can't sleep when they want to. And this is another occupational hazard. Then there's another story, which is Ponagram, about this fantasy village, right, which is supposed to be very beautiful, and it goes into the depths of poverty there and the absence of choice. In The Last Customer, by this Telugu writer Niranjana, he writes about how this woman is a farmer's daughter. The farm goes away, the beggar finds her, the beggar can't look after her, she's hungry, she takes a little chana, someone pushes her, the customer, and tries to get sex from her for free, and finally she can't even stand up straight to attract a customer, and she's lying on the floor and sees a vulture circling in the sky, who she feels is the last customer. So this romanticizing of the customer by people now shows such a lack of empathy. Some of the stories also talk about women who are married and how they are locked up. So Premchand's story, A Murder of Honor, or how the wife actually, just to annoy her husband and to take revenge against him, actually gets out of the house and goes and sits in a brothel and murders his honor by putting her own honor at stake, self-destructing. Or the Amrita Preetham story, Shadi Kanjari, where the husband's concubine or mistress and the wife actually have a moment where they exchange a sort of bonding about how they're handling a situation, whereas the man has no idea, he's helpless. So there are situations, or there's a lovely story by Ismat Chugtai in my book called Gharwali, in which this woman thinks that marriage is the way to go. Till then she's a street person, used for prostitution and sex by different people. And so she thinks that having just one man and getting married will help her. But the man then tries to control her so much that she feels there's no difference, and at least she had more freedom as a prostitute. And so she says, I want to get unmarried. So I also wanted to bring in the fact that as long as patriarchy exists, women will be controlled in prostitution, women will be controlled in marriage, women will also be controlled as goddesses. The image of Lakshmi pressing Vishnu's feet. Why should she be pressing Vishnu's feet? But this is how patriarchy operates. We are controlled everywhere and subjugated everywhere. I'm saying prostitution is an absence of choice, which is based on many realities. One is, of course, the inequality of poverty. People are hungry, people are displaced, their family members may have health needs, etc. It's also based on the inequality of being a woman choices are taken away. Girls are not educated, so they cannot get another job. They are given no skills. They have no access to capital like land. They never own property. They have no access to money in the bank or anything. So their choicelessness makes them easy prey for traffickers. There's a story about that. You know how a woman runs away with her jewelry, which the little jewelry she has, the man takes it away and goes away. Or another story which is set in Banaras, where a woman becomes a man's kept woman because she's starving. And there are stories and stories which I've tried to unpack the layers of what is going on. And then, of course, the third choicelessness, one is poverty, the other is sexism. The third reason for choicelessness is being a teenager, because everybody else takes decisions for you, your father, your husband, your brother, and all of that. And so you cannot take any decision for yourself. You're not even allowed to dream for yourself. What is it that you want to do? Your food is decided, your clothes are decided, what you eat is decided, where you go to is decided. So all your life choices are taken away. And the fourth thing that I've gone into in the to explain the context of inequality is caste. There's a Dalit woman, by the writer, by a Marathi Dalit writer, and the translation has been done by Shanta Gokhale, in which her child is starving, and people are playing around with her, will not give her a job, and they almost make her believe that this is her destiny because of her caste, and therefore she's prostituted. So there's also that subtext that low caste women should be sexually available. In my own work in Apne Aap also, I found that every single woman in prostitution is low caste, either backward class or scheduled caste. So this whole question, this interplay or intertwining inequality of class, caste, gender in India, and on top of that being a teenager, in America being black, in Canada being First Nation, it thrice or four times oppresses women and makes them prey to traffickers. I would rather that we had real alternatives. So I would like investment in women and girls, in their jobs, in their education, even in food. Today at the Jaipur Literature Festival, the Zee Jaipur Literature Festival, I'm going to be talking about that. About nutrition and the girl child. How many girls in India, 6 million girls under the age of 5 in India are stunted, are anemic, have chronic fatigue because they are starving, they don't get enough food. And this is at a time when our government for the last 2 years successively, in 2015 they slashed the budget for the integrated child development scheme, which gave food to poor girls by half, and last year they cut it by another 4%. So you can imagine how many crores has been cut, and that has directly impacted on the food intake of women and girls. And in the meantime, the budget of defense purchases has been going up by 10% each year. So, there's no understanding. We are investing in arms, but we are not investing in our girls. And do we want girls or do we want guns? And no one can eat a gun. Eventually, that is the issue. I would call myself a feminist campaigner, because I feel that in our generation we've tackled a lot of inequalities. We've tackled apartheid. We don't, South Africa is ruled by black people now. And we've ended the Second World War. We haven't had a world war in my generation. The Berlin Wall has come down. We have brought a better quality of life to most of mankind through science and through shared values of social justice. There's better distribution of wealth. The monarchy is gone. Slavery is abolished. Nobody wants to be a slave owner now. But the last frontier is the equality of men and women. Girls are still unequal everywhere in India or America. And there's a huge amount of misogyny which keeps us unequal. So, cuts off our access to food, as I said, to clothing, to shelter, to education. So we can't live our full potential. And I think that is the last frontier for my generation, for our generation of inequality. We can change that, everything will change. Because we'll start from the most fundamental of change, inside the home. So I call myself a feminist campaigner. And as part of being a feminist campaigner, I do several things. So I teach in New York University, I'm a prof, and I teach a Masters of Science in Global Affairs on human trafficking as gender-based violence. I also advise the UN on different laws and policies. I'm the founder and the president of this NGO, grassroots NGO in India, which helps 20,000 girls and women, which is called Apne Aap Women Worldwide. And I try to help other countries like Sweden, Norway, France. Socialist countries are more likely to take ideas from me because my ideas are based on the Gandhian principle of change starting from the bottom and transforming the top. So I want us to think of policy as if the last girl mattered and not to ignore her, because a lot of times, you know, these new smart goals, as they are called, say that let's go for the lowest hanging fruit and then you know, everything will change. But because of that, the system doesn't change and the last girl remains destitute. And we end up only skimming the top of the bottom. So we really need to create a system which will reach the last, and only then true change will happen. So till my last breath, I will keep campaigning for that. And you know, somebody once asked, a British reporter once asked Gandhi ji, Mr. Gandhi, why do you always travel third class? And he said, because there's no fourth class. So I will always keep working for that 13-year-old in a brothel who's the weakest person I know. But through that, I will work to change laws and policies at the UN, in Indian government, in US government, whichever, wherever.